Okay, you may remember that. Literally the altars would be for hours. And it was called praying through. And praying through was as you pray until you don't get up until you get a touch from God. But how praying through works is that there comes a point where what's happening is so often our emotions, our feelings, our mind grabs a hold of it and we don't understand and we get fearful, we get anxious, we live in doubt, we live in all this stuff. And praying through is what it is. It's literally emptying yourself completely of all your feelings, of all your fears, all your anxiety, until you release all the emotional attachment until you can finally just die to that whole thing and you get up and you know that God's heard you.
Yeah. Amen.
That God's heard you. This example came to me by Dr. Jim Dobbins, not James Dobson, but Jim Dobbins, who was a pastor in Ohio. And when he was a young man, he was very bitter and angry. And the reason why is because his mother had passed away at his birth. And so he grew, through his teenage years, he grew into his young adulthood very bitter and very angry and making bad decisions. And he would go to the cemetery often and he would just, cuss God and cuss everybody and cuss the world. And he just was really, 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 really angry. But he had a spiritual background because of his family. So there was a spiritual background, but there was no spiritual life in him personally. And he was just very bitter. And one day he went to the cemetery and he fell on his face. He was just so exhausted. And he was just so emotionally spent and tired of the anger and tired of the bitterness and tired of the frustration. And he just fell on his face at the tomb and he just cried and cried and cried and cried. And he said, I was so emotionally exhausted. There was nothing left in me at all. Nothing left. And it was at that point that God spoke to his heart and said, Jim, he says, not only did one person die for you, and that being Jesus Christ, but two people died to give you birth. And yes, your mother died for you. Make your life worth it that two people gave their life for you. And at that point, his life dramatically changed because he got a touch from the Lord. He gave up all. He was emotionally exhausted, emotionally spent, and he prayed through the difficulty.